Hey everybody, I'm reading Rachel, and I'm here today to read you chapter 17 of the Chessmen of Mars. We're getting into the human chess today. If you haven't been following along, I highly recommend that you go back and start at chapter 1. If you have been following along, please like, comment, and subscribe. Chapter 17, A Play to the Death. Clear and sweet a trumpet spoke across the fields of Jatan. From the high tower its cool voice floated across the city of Manitor and above the babble of human discords rising from the crowded mass that filled the seats of the stadium below. It called the players for the first game, and simultaneously there fluttered to the peaks of 1,000 staffs on tower and battlement and the great wall of the stadium the rich gay pennons of the fighting chiefs of Manitor. Thus was marked the opening of the Jedax Games, the most important of the year and second only to the Grand Decennial Games. Gahan of Gathol watched every play with eagle eye. The match was an unimportant one, being but to settle some petty dispute between two chiefs, and was played with professional Jatan players for points only. No one was killed, and there was but little blood spilled. It lasted about an hour, and was terminated by the chief of the losing side deliberately permitting himself to be outpointed, that the game might be called a draw. Again the trumpet sounded, this time announcing the second and last game of the afternoon. While this was not considered an important match, those being reserved for the fourth and fifth days of the games, it promised to afford sufficient excitement since it was a game to the death. The vital difference between the game played with living men and that in which inanimate pieces are used lies in the fact that while in the latter the mere placing of a piece upon the square occupied by an opponent piece terminates the move, in the former the two pieces thus brought together engage in a duel for possession of the square. Therefore, there enters into the former game not only the strategy of Jatan, but the personal prowess and bravery of each individual piece, so that a knowledge not only of one's own men, but of each player upon the opposing side, is of vast value to a chief. In this respect was Gahan handicapped, though the loyalty of his players did much to offset his ignorance of them, since they aided him in arranging the board to the best advantage, and told him honestly the faults and virtues of each. One fought best in a losing game, another was too slow, another too impetuous, this one had fire and a heart of steel, but lacked endurance. Of the opponents, though, they knew little or nothing, and now as the two sides took their places upon the black and orange squares of the great Jatan board, Gahan observed for the first time a close view of those who opposed him. The Orange Chief had not yet entered the field, but all his men were in place. Valdor turned to Gahan. "They are all criminals from the pits of Manitor," he said. "There is no slave among them. We shall not have to fight against a single fellow countryman, and every life we take will be the life of an enemy." "It is well," replied Gahan, "but where's their chief, and where are the two princesses?" "They're coming now, see?" And he pointed across the field to where two women could be seen approaching under guard. As they came nearer, Gahan saw that one was indeed Tara of Helium, but the other he did not recognize, and then they were brought to the center of the field midway between the two sides, and there waited until the Orange Chief arrived. Florin voiced an exclamation of surprise when he recognized him. "By my first ancestor, if it's not one of their great chiefs," he said, "and we were told that slaves and criminals were to play the stake of this game." His words were interrupted by the keeper of the towers, whose duty it was not only to announce the games and the stakes, but to act as referee as well. "Of this, the second game of the first day of Jedax Games in the 433rd year of Otar, Jedak of Manitor, the princesses of each side shall be the sole stakes, and to the survivors of the winning side shall belong both the princesses, to do with as they shall see fit. The orange princess is the slave woman Lano of Gathol, the black princess is the slave woman Tara, princess of Helium. The black chief is Ukal of Manitage, a volunteer player. The orange chief is the Dwar Udor of the 8th Utan of Jedak of Manitor, also a volunteer player. The square shall be contested to the death. Just are the laws of Manitor. I have spoken." The initial move was won by Udor, following which the two chiefs escorted their respective princesses to the square each was to occupy. It was the first time Gahan had been alone with Tara since she'd been brought upon the field. He saw her scrutinizing him closely as he approached to lead her to the place, and wondered if she recognized him, but if she did, she gave no sign of it. He could not but remember her last words, "I hate you," and her desertion of him when he'd been locked in the room beneath the palace by Igos the taxidermist, and so he did not seek to enlighten her as to his identity. He meant to fight for her, to die for her if necessary, and he did not die, and if he did not die, to go on fighting to the end for her love. Gahan of Gathol was not easily to be discouraged, but he was compelled to admit that his chances of winning the love of Tara of Helium were remote. Already had she repulsed him twice, once as Jed of Gathol and again as Taran the Panthan. Before his love, however, came her safety, and the former must be relegated to the background until the latter had been achieved. Passing among the players already at their stations, the two took their places upon their respective squares. At Tara's left was the black chief, Gahan of Gathol. Directly in front of her, the princesses Panthen, Florin of Gathol, and at her right, the princesses Audwar, Valdor of Helium. And each of these knew the part that he was to play, win or lose, as did each of the other black players. As Tara took her place, Valdor bowed low. "My sword is at your feet, Tara of Helium," he said. She turned and looked at him, an expression of surprise and incredulity upon her face. "Valdor the Dwar!" she exclaimed. "Valdor of Helium! One of my father's trusted captains! Can it be possible my eyes speak the truth?" "It is Valdor, princess," the warrior replied, "and here to die for you if need be, as is every wearer of the black upon the fields of Jatan today. Know, princess," he whispered, "that upon this side is no man of Manator, but each and every is an enemy of Manator." She cast a quick, meaning glance toward Gahan. "But what of him?" she whispered, and then she caught her breath quickly in surprise. "Shade of the first Jeddak," she exclaimed. "I did but just recognize him through his disguise." "And you trust him?" asked Valdor. "I know him not, but he spoke fairly, as an honorable warrior, and we have taken him at his word." "You have made no mistake," replied Tara of Helium. "I would trust him with my life, with my soul, and you too may trust him." Happy indeed would have been Gahan of Gathol could he have heard those words, but fate, who is usually unkind to the lover in such matters, ordained it otherwise. And then the game was on. Eudor moved his princess's Audwar 3 squares diagonally to the right, which placed the piece upon the Black Chief's Audwar's 7th. The move was indicative of the game that Eudor intended playing, a game of blood rather than of science, and evidenced his contempt for his opponents. Gahan followed with his Audwar's Panthen 1 square straight forward, a more scientific move, which opened up an avenue for himself through his line of Panthens, as well as announcing to the players and spectators that he intended having a hand in the fighting himself, even before the exigencies of the game forced it upon him. The move elicited a ripple of applause from those sections of seats reserved for the common warriors and their women, showing perhaps that Eudor was none too popular with these, and, too, it had its effect upon the morale of Gahan's pieces. A chief may, and often does, play almost an entire game without leaving his own square, where, mounted upon a thoat, he may overlook the entire field and direct each move, nor may he be reproached for lack of courage should he elect thus to play the game, since by the rules, were he to be slain or so badly wounded as to be compelled to withdraw, a game that might otherwise have been won by science, the science of his play and the prowess of his men would be drawn. To invite personal combat, therefore, denotes confidence in his own swordsmanship and great courage, 2 attributes that were calculated to fill the black players with hope and valor when evinced by their chief thus early in the game. Eudor's next move placed Lano's Audwar upon Tara's Audwar's 4th, within striking distance of the Black Princess. Another move and the game would be lost to Gahan unless the Orange Audwar was overthrown or Tara moved to a position of safety. But to move his princess now would be to admit his belief in the superiority of the Orange. In the 3 squares allowed him, he could not place himself upon the square occupied by the Audwar of Eudor's princess. There was only one player upon the black side that might dispute the square with the enemy, and that was the chief's Audwar, who stood upon Gahan's left. Gahan turned upon his thoat and looked at the man. He was a splendid-looking fellow, resplendent in the gorgeous trappings of an Audwar, the 5 brilliant feathers which denoted his position rising defiantly erect from his thick black hair. In common with every player upon the field and every spectator in the crowded stands, he knew what was passing in his chief's mind. He dared not speak, the ethics of the game forbade it, but what his lips may not voice, his eyes expressed in martial fire and eloquently. "The honor of the black and the safety of our princess are secure with me." Gahan hesitated no longer. "Chief's Audwar to Princess Audwar's 4th, he commanded. It was the courageous move of a leader who had taken up the gauntlet thrown down by his opponent. The warrior sprang forward and leaped into the square occupied by Eudor's piece. It was the first disputed square of the game. The eyes of the players were fastened upon the contestants. The spectators leaned forward in their seats after the first applause had greeted the move, and silence fell upon the vast assemblage. If the black went down to defeat, Eudor could move his victorious piece onto the square occupied by Tara of Helium, and the game would be over in 4 moves, and lost to Gahan of Gathol. If the orange lost, Eudor would have sacrificed one of his most important pieces, and more than lost what advantage the first move might have given him. Physically, the 2 men appeared perfectly matched, and each was fighting for his life, but from the first it was apparent that the black Audwar was the better swordsman, and Gahan knew that he had another and perhaps greater advantage over his antagonist. The latter was fighting for his life only, without the spur of loyalty or chivalry. The black Audwar had these to strengthen his arm, and besides these, the knowledge of the thing that Gahan had whispered to the ears of his players before the game, and so he fought for what is more than life to the man of honor. It was a duel that held those who witnessed it in spellbound silence. The weaving blades gleamed in the brilliant sunlight, ringing to the parries of cut and thrust. The barbaric harness of the duelist lent splendid color to the savage martial scene. The orange Audouar, forced upon the defensive, was fighting madly for his life. The black, with cool and terrible efficiency, was forcing him steadily, step by step, into a corner of the square, a position from which there could be no escape. To abandon the square was to lose it to his opponent and win for himself the ignoble and immediate death before the jeering populace. Spurred on by the seeming hopelessness of his plight, the orange Audouar burst into a sudden fury of offense that forced the black back a half a dozen steps, and then the sword of Eudor's piece leaped in and drew the first blood from the shoulder of his merciless opponent. An illy smothered cry of encouragement went up from Eudor's men. The orange Audouar, encouraged by his single success, sought to bear down the black by the rapidity of his attack. There was a moment in which the swords moved with a rapidity that no man's eye might follow, and then the black Audouar made a lightning parry of a vicious thrust, leaned quickly forward into the opening he had effected, and drove his sword through the heart of the orange Audouar. To the hilt he drove it through the body of the orange Audouar. A shout arose from the stands, for wherever may have been the favor of the spectators, none there was who could not say it had not been a pretty fight, or that the better man had not won. And from the black players came a sigh of relief as they relaxed from the tension of the past moments. I shall not weary you with the details of the game, only the high features of it are necessary to your understanding of the outcome. The fourth move after the victory of the black Audouar found Gahan upon Eudor's fourth. An orange Panthan was on the adjoining square diagonally to his right, and the only opposing piece that could engage him other than Eudor himself. It had been apparent to both players and spectators for the past two moves that Gahan was moving straight across the field into the enemy's country to seek personal combat with the orange chief, that he was staking all upon his belief in the superiority of his own swordsmanship, since if the two chiefs engage, the outcome decides the game. Eudor could move out and engage Gahan, or he could move his princess's Panthan upon the square occupied by Gahan in the hope that the former would defeat the black chief and thus draw the game, which is the outcome if any other than a chief slays the opposing chief, or he could move away and escape temporarily the necessity for personal combat, or at least that is evidently what he had in mind, as it was obvious to all who saw him scanning the board about him. And his disappointment was apparent when he finally discovered that Gahan had so placed himself that there was no square to which Eudor could move, that it was not within Gahan's power to reach at his own next move. Eudor had placed his own princess 4 squares east of Gahan when her position had been threatened, and he had hoped to lure the black chief after her and away from Eudor, but in that he had failed. He now discovered that he might play his own Audouar into personal combat with Gahan, but he had already lost one Audouar and could ill spare the other. His position was a delicate one, since he did not wish to engage Gahan personally, while it appeared that there was little likelihood of his being able to escape. There was just one hope, and that lay in his princess's Panthan. So without more deliberation, he ordered the piece onto the square occupied by the black chief. The sympathies of the spectators were all with Gahan now. If he lost, the game would be declared a draw, nor did they think better of drawn games upon Barsoom than do Earthmen. If he won, it would doubtless mean a duel between the two chiefs, a development for which they were all hoping. The game already bade fair to be a short one, and it would be an angry crowd should it be decided a draw with only 2 men slain. There were great historic games on record where of the 40 pieces on the field when the game opened, only 3 survived, the 2 princesses and the victorious chief. They blamed Eudor, though in fact he was well within his rights in directing his play as he saw fit, nor was a refusal on his part to engage the black chief necessarily an imputation of cowardice. He was a great chief who had conceived a notion to possess the slave Tara. There was no honor that could accrue to him from engaging in combat with slaves and criminals or an unknown warrior from Manitage, nor was the stake of sufficient import to warrant the risk. But now the duel between Gahan and the Orange Panthan was on, and the decision of the next move was no longer in other hands than theirs. It was the first time that these Manitorians had seen Gahan of Gathol fight, but Tara of Helium knew that he was master of his sword. Could he have seen the proud light in her eyes as he crossed blades with the wearer of the orange, he might easily have wondered if they were the same eyes that had flashed fire and hatred at him that time he had covered her lips with mad kisses in the pits of the palace of Otar. As she watched him, she could not but compare his swordplay with that of the greatest swordsman of 2 worlds, her father, John Carter of Virginia, Prince of Helium, Warlord of Barsoom, and she knew that the skill of the Black Chief suffered little by the comparison. Short and to the point was the duel that decided possession of the Orange Chief's fourth. The spectators had settled themselves for an interesting engagement of at least average duration when they were brought almost standing by a brilliant flash of rapid swordplay that was over ere one could catch his breath. They saw the Black Chief step quickly back, his point upon the ground, while his opponent, his sword slipping from his fingers, clutched his breast, sank to his knees, and then lunged forward upon his face. And then Gahan of Gathol turned his eyes directly upon Eudor of Manitor, 3 squares away. 3 squares is the chief's move. 3 squares in any direction or combination of directions, only provided that he does not cross the same square twice in a given move. The people saw and guessed Gahan's intention. They rose and roared forth their approval as he moved deliberately across the intervening squares toward the Orange Chief. Otar in the royal enclosure sat frowning upon the scene. Otar was angry. He was angry with Eudor for having entered this game for possession of a slave for whom it had been his wish only slaves and criminals should strive. He was angry with the warrior from Manitage for having so far outgeneraled and outfought the men from Manitor. He was angry with the populace because of their open hostility toward one who'd basked in the sunshine of his favor for long years. Otar the Jeddak had not enjoyed the afternoon. Those who surrounded him were equally glum. They too scowled upon the field, the players and the people. Among them was a bent and wrinkled old man who gazed through weak and watery eyes upon the field and the players. As Gahan entered his square, Eudor leaped toward him with drawn sword with such fury as might have overborne a less skilled and powerful swordsman. For a minute the fighting was fast and furious, and by comparison reducing to insignificance all that had gone before. Here indeed were two magnificent swordsmen, and here was to be a battle that bade fair to make up for whatever the people felt they had been defrauded of by the shortness of the game. Nor had it continued long before there were many who would have prophesied that they were witnessing a duel that was to become historic in the annals of Jatam at Manitor. Every trick, every subterfuge known to the art of fence these men employed. Time and again each scored a point and brought blood to his opponent's copper hide until both were red with gore, but neither seemed able to administer the coup de grace. From her position upon the opposite side of the field, Tara of Helium watched this long-drawn battle. Always it seemed to her that the Black Chief fought upon the defensive, or when he assumed to push his opponent, he neglected 1,000 openings that her practiced eye beheld. Never did he seem in real danger, nor never did he appear to exert himself to quite the pitch needful for victory. The duel already had been long contested, and the day was drawing to a close. Presently the sudden transition from daylight to darkness, which, owing to the tenuity of the air upon Barsoom, occurs almost without the warming twilight of earth, would occur. Would the fight never end? Would the game be called a draw after all? What ailed the Black Chief? Tara wished that she might answer at least the last of these questions, for she was sure that Taran the Panthan, as she knew him, while fighting brilliantly, was not giving of himself all that he might. She could not believe that fear was restraining his hand, but that there was something besides inability to push Eudor more fiercely she was confident. What it was, however, she could not guess. Once she saw Gahan glance quickly up toward the sinking sun. In 30 minutes it would be dark. And then she saw, and all those others saw, a strange transition steal over the swordplay of the Black Chief. It was as though he'd been playing with the great Dwar Eudor all these hours, and now he still played with him. But there was a difference. He played with him terribly, as a carnivore plays with its victim in the instant before the kill. The Orange Chief was helpless now in the hands of a swordsman so superior that there could be no comparison, and the people sat in open-mouthed wonder and awe as Gahan of Gathol cut his foe to ribbons and then struck him down with a blow that cleft him to the chin. In 20 minutes the sun would set. But what of that? End of the chapter. We have had our exciting game of human chess, and of course Gahan wins. Yeah, I enjoy the interplay here of science and strategy versus brute strength, and also that Gahan cares mostly about exciting the honor and loyalty of his other warriors because he has complete faith in himself. Uh, and Tara does too. And yeah, again, I love that she's an expert, that her father, John Carter of Virginia, the old Confederate soldier, taught his daughter swordplay. And though we don't see her, haven't seen her doing any of it, we have at least seen her stab a few guys to death. So, at least there's that. Yeah. Please like, subscribe, comment, and join me next time for Chapter 18, A Task for Loyalty. Again, I'm reading Rachel. Have a delicious day.